What is the best shot cycle for recurve archery? That's what I want to talk about today, because this has all started a long time ago in truth, but recently I got an email from someone that said, do you teach more linear, more angular? Do you kind of recommend more of a KSL or NTS or best shot cycle, or more of a Korean type shot cycle, or more what World Archery teaches, or all these kind of different things? And this got me thinking. I've been wanting to make this video for a while and I never got round to it. But I want to start today. I want to kind of talk about these different shot cycles and give my kind of thoughts on how you would then pick how to shoot, essentially. But I want to start the video today with a little story. So in 2017, I moved to America and I trained and lived there for a couple of years. And in that time, it was quite bizarre, if I'm honest, because when I first arrived there, I started getting asked a question that I'd never been asked before. Everyone seemed to ask me, do you shoot linear or angular? Do you shoot Korean style or angular? Do you try and shoot NTS or not? And everything was put into these buckets of this technique or this technique. It's either one or the other. You have to choose. You can't shoot this way without choosing that, oh, okay, I'm going to prescribe to every single thing in this technique. Or you can't shoot Korean style unless you have a square stance, or all these things. And it was really interesting to me, because when I was first asked about this, but it was the first time, I kind of looked at the person and said, what do you mean? And they had to explain a bit more what they were. I was like, what do you mean linear or angular? I didn't really understand the fascination with it being such a black and white thing, because this is where this is leading. To me, this is not how you should look at it. There isn't a black and white linear versus angular, in my opinion. There isn't a this technique versus this technique. And even the way of asking that, or the way of assuming that there's this way of doing it versus this way of doing it, one of them must be correct and the other one therefore is wrong, is really going to lead a lot of people down the wrong path. So this is why I think this is an important video to make today, and I wanted to kind of give my thoughts on it. So to start with, my opinion is that every technique shot cycle or name or whatever you want to call it, whoever's made it, whoever's branded it, whoever's come up with it, remember that all of them are completely arbitrary and made up. Someone just made them up. So let's start with that. They're not a real thing. Let's start with that. The second thing is, a lot of the reasons why these things exist is it's a lot more easy to kind of understand. So I understand why people have done this, because when you're trying to teach something, if you've got a framework and a name for it, it's a lot easier to make it understandable and people for them to apply it. The same thing goes for my website. I've deliberately not tried to create any sort of shot system or cycle or anything like that, and this is why on my website you'll see, maybe I can bring it up here, but you'll see on my website that it's just in sections of the shot cycle. And this was a deliberate choice, because I didn't want to create the Ash Morgan technique or whatever it is, because that's not how I view technique. And I think that actually leads a lot of people astray, thinking, oh, I can't shoot well if I don't do everything in this technique because it's not going to work together. So, like I said, I don't prescribe to there being a singular technique or one thing. And even the idea, for example, of linear versus angular, I find that, let's take that example, linear versus angular versus Korean technique, because this is one I got asked a lot when I was in America. So let's take that example. When you say Korean technique, are you talking about this Korean technique here? Park Sung-hyun, this is from 2004, one of the best archers of all time, definitely at the time, and I mean probably the greatest. I guess with the mixed team medals it's hard to say that now, but probably one of the greatest female Olympic archers of all time. Is it this Korean technique you're talking about? Or maybe is it this Korean technique of Kim Woo-jin that you're talking about? Or maybe it's not Kim Woo-jin's technique. Maybe it's a different Korean technique of Lee Woo-suk's technique. So you can see where I'm going with this. Or maybe Im Dong-hyun's technique. So to me, this is where generalizations and putting things into, and notice, by the way, open stance here, A lot of people seem to think that you can only shoot a square stance if you're shooting Korean technique. Again, not true. And what is Korean technique anyway? But this is where generalizations and stuff like that don't help. So my take-home message from this video and my opinion on this is, A, there is no shot cycle that is best. Let's just start with that. Anyone who says that there is only one way to shoot is deluded or naive at best, or is just trying to prescribe you down my way or the highway. Because everyone with any sense can look at everyone shooting and see there isn't one way to shoot, is there? There's clearly not one way to shoot. Because even when you look at the top 5 in the world, or even the top 3 archers in the world, you've got vastly different techniques. I mean, let's look at the Paris Olympic match. You had Kim Woo-jin and Brady Ellison. I mean, massively different techniques. So you've got Brady Ellison here, who at the start here, I think this angle shows it probably best, massively drawing from the side. So when he raises the bow here, massively drawing from the side, coming around much more. Obviously this is KSL/NTS/best, whatever you want to call it. But this technique works for Brady. Incredibly different to the other archer in that gold medal match in Paris, Kim Woo-jin, who has a completely different technique. So even amongst the top 2 in the world and the gold and silver Olympic medalists, you can see there's this variation. So I don't prescribe to this. I would suggest you don't either. And I would also suggest that you don't think of technique as, oh, I need to follow this thing, this whole technique, and I need to follow this thing, this whole technique. And this is something I've tried to do, like I said, deliberately on my website with the technique guides. So you can have a read through these, but with the technique guides, for example, I always try and mention about, try and understand what you're trying to achieve with this part of your technique. So let's take the draw, this kind of whole linear versus angular debate, which always I find interesting because to me, there's not a clear differentiation. To me, it's, what are you trying to achieve? So let's start with that. We're trying to basically draw the bow and get to a full draw position that's consistent, maybe good alignment if that's something hopefully that you want, and also having your shoulder blade move in the way that you want. If those are your goals, some people can do that by raising up and drawing more linear, if you like, with their hand closer to the bow shoulder. It's not linear because you're still rotating around with the shoulder. So that whole terminology to me of kind of linear versus angular, I don't kind of subscribe to that, if you like. Some people can do that with their hand closer, whereas some people might need to, or they feel it works best for them, to draw way out and around, like Brady, for example. Again, the thing is, if one technique was better than the other, that means that everyone that shot drawing way out around would have huge benefits from it. But that's not the case. Some people have huge benefits from it, and some people don't. For me, if I try drawing way out, and I've tried this just with a TheraBand and just with a light bow, which is what I suggest you do if you're trying a new technique, when you try it, you can feel like, oh, that doesn't work for my body. I'm not as flexible as Brady. A lot of people aren't, and that doesn't work for me. Also, drawing like this, I haven't got the video up now, but more Kim Jae-dyok style, where he draws very in and manages to get his, if I go to the full screen, he draws very close in here, and somehow, even though his hand is close in, by the time he gets to full draw, he still gets this draw elbow around. I can't do that way either. So for me, it's about finding the middle ground of what is the goal. I don't want a shoulder injury. That's one goal. I want my shoulder to feel smooth and like I'm able to move it around. I want the scapula to move around. I want it to feel like I'm solid at full draw. I want to be able to expand by squeezing the draw scapula towards the spine. These are the things that you want to look at rather than I must shoot this way, I must shoot this way. It's about the result. So blindly following a system of something is not what I'd suggest. It's always about looking at what you're trying to get out of it. And this is, again, something that I've tried to highlight in all of the content I put out as well. Don't just follow what I say. Try it and see what you're trying to get from it, and then try and make up your own mind as to what works as well. Hopefully with a coach, maybe an experienced archer as well. That will obviously help you find the correct thing quicker. But this is the thing, it's individual. On that note, this is a perfect kind of segue, if you like, to the sponsor of today's video, which is myself, as normal. if you've not checked my courses out yet, this is exactly the kind of thing that I talk about in my courses. I don't prescribe you must do this or you must do this. There are certain things that I'd suggest. Okay, for example, with the draw side, it's a lot easier if you don't kink your wrist, as an example. But I try and encourage you to say, what am I trying to achieve from this? And more importantly, how can I gauge if this part of the technique is working or not? Because that's what it's all about. For example, the anchor, I talk about the anchor. What are we trying to achieve here when we get to the anchor? So how can you measure that for yourself? Because everyone's hand shape is different. Everyone's face shape is different. So I can't tell you in a course, although you should check them out, I can't tell you your perfect anchor. It's for you to experiment and work out and go from principles. So this is where I differ maybe from a lot of other coaches that might say you have to shoot this way or this way. I look at it more from a principles standpoint and try and encourage you to learn what those principles are and then apply them to your shot. So for example, in the courses, one of the principles I mention about is having, as I've mentioned many, many times, is having a stable body and a stable posture. And if you've got that, it makes everything else easier because you can feel what's happening within your shoulders. That's one example. So yeah, I definitely recommend thinking about this, thinking about your shot in this way, and try and remove the idea that you must do one way or the other. And even if you are an avid supporter of one technique and it really, really works for you, don't let this bias you and not have the benefit of maybe cherry picking things from other techniques. Just because you have an open stance doesn't mean you need to draw exactly a certain way, or just because you draw a certain way doesn't mean you need to anchor a certain way, or it doesn't mean you need to expand a certain way. So this is what I'd encourage you to kind of think, how I'd encourage you to think about it, essentially. So on that note, I forgot to talk about that kind of segue, if you like. Check out my courses if you haven't already. There's a special discount if you go to onlinearcheryacademy.com, click on explore the courses, and you can have a look at them there. But if you just want some free email tips that I send out every week as well, people love this, but I send this out every week, pop your email address in at onlinearcheryacademy.com. I'll send you those tips completely free. Or if you want to join my membership, you can go to become a member and join my membership, where we do Q&As, people send in their questions, sometimes I analyze someone's technique, and I'm going to record a couple of videos on stuff like that after this one as well. So those are my thoughts on these different shot cycles. I want to finish this video and give you some kind of tips to take away, because you're probably thinking now, that's great. Okay, so ignore the fact that there's different shot cycles. How do I shoot then? How do I decide what to follow or what advice to take? The number one thing I'd suggest is, I implore you, please, to practice your draw, your whole shot cycle, with a band and a light bow, and you will very, very quickly find out what works for you or not. It will teach you so much because you can slow it down, you can close your eyes, you can feel what's happening. This is literally exactly how I spent years and years and probably 500,000 arrows shooting where I had my hand too close to my bow shoulder. I didn't realize it was a problem. I thought that's just how I shot. It becomes such a habit, I never even thought about it. I assumed that when we were looking from above, maybe if I can get a video up here, that I couldn't get my draw elbow into line. So if we go to here again, I'll bring a video up here. So if we go and bring it up, which video do I want? I want the overhead. So I assumed for years and years, I could not for the life of me get my draw elbow in line. Like you see it is here. This is after working on it, and I finally got it in line. For years, I convinced myself that it was just my body proportions. People said, oh, your forearm length versus your upper arm length is wrong. You'll never be able to get it round, and it's just biomechanically impossible. Some people just can't do it. And I assumed that they were right. I kind of just thought that's how it was. But then when I did these light bow draw-ups, and I actually really went through my technique and thought, what is working for me here? I actually properly went through it. That is when I found out, if I move back slightly, that's when I found out I was drawing too close here, and I was never going to get my elbow round doing that, for me. And then, when I focused on keeping this straight, for example, not bending the wrist, leading from the elbow, when I then practiced that with a shot trainer, with a light bow, and then was able to draw around. When I was then able to do that with a light bow, and here's the key thing, it might sound obvious, but I was able to repeat it every single shot. When I was able to do that, that was the magic moment, because I was like, okay, I can do it with the light bow. It's 20 pounds. I then can do it with a light bow that's 25 pounds. I can do it with a bow that's 30 pounds. Can I now do it with my bow? And it turns out, as you can see in this video, I can. And directly after this, so I spent 3 or 4 months in the winter working on this. And then in the February after I worked on that, that was the best, essentially one of the best seasons I had, starting with the Vegas shoot. I was in the flights division at the time, won the Vegas shoot by miles, shooting, I think, 296 or 297 for one of the rounds at Vegas. By far, one of my best indoor competition performances. Essentially, it's half of a Theta 18, so that's like a 594 level. And this was because of my elbow coming around, made my whole shot so much better. Something that I assumed I could never do because I was following other techniques, and this is just how I did it, and I wasn't using a light bow. So I'd encourage you, I'll go back to the full screen, to use a light bow and draw-ups to, maybe you read about a certain technique, maybe you read about it on my website or from someone else or from someone else's video, then try it with a light bow and see what works for you with it. If you don't like a certain part of it, maybe ask a coach their opinion, maybe try a different thing, but really listen to your body and see what works. If you're trying to do a technique where you're drawing way out and coming in, but every single time you feel like you're drawing a different amount and you can never get your shoulder feeling nice, don't do that technique. This is a really good example of when I did that video on Florian Onru's technique 3-4 weeks ago. He was saying that for a long time, when he was raising up, he had a shorter pre-draw and he didn't have his bow arm bent. But when he was doing that, he was having problems with his draw shoulder. This is a perfect example of this, because basically everyone else shoots, pretty much 95% of people, 98 or whatever, shoot with their front arm straight when they lift up. Most people shoot like that. And Florian, super clever, and this is why I liked that so much when I did that video, he said, you know what? Why does everyone shoot like that? It doesn't work for me. It's really important for my draw shoulder in order to not get an injury in the bicep tendon that he was mentioning about as well. So maybe I can draw a different way. And this is what I want to encourage you to look at today. So that's all I've got for you today. To leave you with that, there is no such thing as different shot cycles. They're all made up anyway. All of it is made up. Try and learn from principles, not from following blindly some sort of system that is supposedly magic. And then finally, listen to your body and test things out with a band and a light bow to see what works for you before you then migrate onto your normal weight bow and heavier stuff. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'd be fascinated to know in the comments below, what do you think of these kind of different names of shot cycles, all these different kind of frameworks of teaching and all that kind of stuff. I think it might be interesting. I'll have a read through the comments as well. I'd be fascinated to know what you guys think. But yeah, that's it for today, and I'll see you in the next video.